Benjamin Turner had long been considering his restaurant chain as his life's work, and he had several good reasons for it. A long time ago, an ordinary city cafeteria stood in the place of his first restaurant, but it was making so little money that it was on the verge of bankruptcy. Benjamin himself worked as an ordinary cook back then. No, he wasn't a chef yet. He couldn't even dream about such a position at the time. Nevertheless, Ben's dishes were in high demand among customers, which led him to think that it might be a good idea for him to try his hand as the owner of the establishment. Having taken out the bank loan, he bought the very building of the cafeteria where he had worked as a cook not too long ago. In the early days, Benjamin's establishment brought in a modest income. But the young cook didn't despair, being confident that luck would eventually smile upon him. Benjamin had to go through a lot before his restaurant outshone all the other competitors and became the best in town. And there was more. After accumulating enough capital for an expansion, Benjamin opened several more restaurants similar to the first one, and his income increased greatly. Time passed, but the quality of food and service in Mr. Turner's establishments remained consistently high. As fate would have it, none of Benjamin's family members wanted to continue the family business, which meant that he had to manage the restaurants at an age when many chose to retire. Keeping everything under control at the age of 70 was very challenging, and Mr. Turner knew it better than anyone else. Of course, each of his restaurants had its own manager, but it didn't help much. Mr. Turner couldn't oversee all the operations, and unethical employees used it as an opportunity to enrich themselves at his expense. This situation weighed heavily on the elderly businessman, forcing him to seek new solutions to his problem. Everything might have been fine if it weren't for the fact that Benjamin's health had deteriorated sharply, which had understandably affected the operation of his business. Having decided to focus on his health first, Mr. Turner went to the hospital for a checkup. He suspected that his condition could have been provoked by his indulgence in pork steaks and red wine. But Mr. Turner couldn't know for sure whether that was the case or not, and was hoping to find out the cause of his health problems. After undergoing all the necessary tests, the elderly businessman was asked to wait in the hallway. Mr. Turner didn't know exactly what was happening inside his body. He felt like every single part of it was hurting. Just recently, the man could spend days at the restaurant overseeing all the work done in the kitchen, but now he got tired within an hour of crossing the restaurant's threshold. His wife attributed it to age-related changes in his body, but he felt that the real cause was something else. His agonizing contemplations were interrupted by the voice of the on-call nurse. "Mr. Turner, sir, the oncologist is waiting for you in room 17. Benjamin shuddered. He felt shivers running down his spine. His heart was racing, and his lips started trembling treacherously. "Why do I need to see an oncologist? I've never had any problems with that," he stammered. The nurse shook her head sadly and added, "You need to go to room 17, sir. The doctor is already waiting for you." Mr. Turner's mood was hopelessly ruined. He lowered his head and trudged to the oncologist's office. There, the businessman was shown his test results, which confirmed that he had late-stage cancer. "How was this possible? I was feeling fine until very recently," he asked in a trembling voice. The doctor nodded. "I'm sorry, sir. This disease is often asymptomatic at early stages, so by the time it's discovered, treatment can only alleviate the symptoms but not cure the disease." Mr. Turner swallowed hard and asked, "So how much time do I have? A week? A month? A year?" The doctor hesitated for a moment. He clearly didn't expect such a blunt question, but he decided to be straightforward and replied, "I can't know for sure, sir. It depends on whether you're willing to fight for your life and undergo treatment. I believe that with treatment you could live for at least a year, but maybe more. But it's up to you whether you want to fight it or not." Mr. Turner turned pale, and his forehead was instantly covered in sweat. Frankly speaking, he never thought that he could get so sick, especially not at such an advanced age. On the other hand, Benjamin had always been a fighter, so he intended to fight to the end. "All right, let's fight this thing. I'll do whatever I need to do." The businessman left the doctor's office 10 minutes later, holding a sheet of medical prescriptions and recommendations in his hand. However, the most interesting part was that even at such a moment, he wasn't only thinking about his treatment, but also about his business. After purchasing all the necessary medications at the pharmacy, Mr. Turner locked himself in his office and started studying the income reports for the past quarter. The more he delved into the documents, the clearer the situation became to him. The problem was that the profits of the very first restaurant had decreased almost in half. On the other hand, one of the newer establishments was showing a significant increase in the level of income. The restaurant owner wasn't exactly sure what accounted for such a significant difference, but he suspected that the reason had something to do with the staff. At that moment, a very interesting thought crossed the elderly businessman's mind. A mysterious smile appeared on his face, and his eyes got a strange, almost childish gleam. What if I were to dress in simpler clothes, put on a wig, and come to my own restaurant as a customer? He whispered. For anyone else, this idea might have seemed pointless, but not for Benjamin Turner, who had gone from being a cook in the city cafeteria to owning a chain of restaurants in Chicago and beyond. As a model for his transformation, Mr. Turner chose the image of a frail old man whose age had long exceeded 90 years. To make sure his service was as authentic as possible, the businessman decided to use a wig, false eyebrows, and makeup. Getting the right clothes was much easier since Mr. Turner simply dressed in the clothes left behind by a gardener who had quit his job a couple of weeks ago. Worn-out shoes with scuffed heels, faded jeans, and an ill-fitted jacket. To complete this comical appearance, he put on a sun-bleached baseball cap whose original color was no longer discernible. After putting on all those clothes, Mr. Turner approached the mirror. Looking back at him was an old man with a thick network of wrinkles on his emaciated, gaunt face and untrimmed gray locks peeking from out under the baseball cap. He knew that even his own mother wouldn't be able to recognize him in this outfit, let alone the restaurant staff. For his starting point, the businessman chose the establishment where his journey in the restaurant business had begun. He knew that other restaurants operated by the same rules and regulations, which he developed over the years, and that establishment served as an example to all the others. However, when the disguised businessman crossed the threshold of this restaurant, he was in for a big surprise. It all started with the security guard who flat out refused to let the feeble old man in. "But why? What's the matter? Why can't I have lunch at this restaurant?" Mr. Turner asked, carefully altering his voice. The client's question puzzled the security guard. His face clearly showed that he didn't know the answer. Most likely, simply refusing to serve them was always enough to make undesirable customers leave. But things weren't that way with this old man. The security guard thought for a moment and then said, "Wait a minute, I'll get a manager." The businessman in disguise nodded in response. He knew the manager well. 6 months ago, Mr. Turner had personally appointed Jeffrey to this position and was 100% sure of his honesty. However, he now saw the situation in a different light. It took Jeffrey 10 minutes to show up. He quickly looked at the old man and frowned in displeasure. "We don't have any empty tables. Don't even bother arguing. We're completely booked. Go find a cheaper place." Benjamin knew that the manager was blatantly lying, as the restaurant's occupancy at this time barely reached 30%. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can see some empty tables even from here. Aren't there supposed to be special signs on them if they're reserved?" The businessman in disguise countered immediately. The old man's response clearly hit a nerve with Jeffrey. "Listen to me. In this restaurant, I decide who gets in and who doesn't. So if I say there's no empty tables, it means there's no empty tables. And if something doesn't sit well with you, feel free to go somewhere else and prove your point there," Jeffrey retorted. Mr. Turner had to exert significant effort to restrain himself from revealing his true identity right there and then. Having nodded at the manager, he reluctantly opened the door and left the stuffy restaurant with the final, "You'll regret this." At that moment, he understood the reason behind the restaurant's decline in profits. Jeffrey's unpleasant behavior had definitely put an end to his career with Mr. Thompson's restaurant network. He would be dismissed the very next day, but only after getting a reprimand in front of his subordinates. Despite feeling very tired, Benjamin decided to visit another restaurant. He decided to go to the restaurant where its profits increased sharply after a young man named Bruce was appointed as the manager. To be honest, Mr. Turner had never placed his trust in youth before, preferring to rely on experienced and qualified employees. However, Bruce was an exception. as during his interview he managed to convince the elderly businessman that he deserved a chance. Now, Benjamin intended to inspect the establishment that he had never held high hopes for. As soon as the businessman in disguise came to the door, the security guard immediately escorted him inside and even pointed out a few empty tables. Unlike in the previous place he had checked, the dining area was more than 70% full, which spoke volumes. However, even before Mr. Turner had time to take a seat, a pleasant young waitress came to take his order. Soon, the manager approached him, warmly thanking the old man for choosing their restaurant. "Come again, sir. We're always happy to welcome new customers," Bruce said, shaking the old man's hand. This gesture helped Bruce immediately earn Mr. Turner's respect, as he valued good service and a pleasant atmosphere within his restaurant. Having truly enjoyed his meal, the businessman left a generous tip, not forgetting the manager and the guard at the entrance. Only once he was outside did Mr. Turner decide it was time to remove the annoying makeup and wig. Having decided not to put things off, Benjamin held a staff meeting the very next morning. He publicly dismissed the manager named Jeffrey and several other members of the staff of the restaurant that Jeffrey managed. Mr. Turner knew he was making the right move, as the level of service in that restaurant could very well leave him and his family bankrupt in no time. After letting Jeffrey go, the businessman appointed Bruce to his position, as he'd already seen how talented and dedicated the young man was. "Thank you, sir. I promise you won't regret putting your trust in me," the young man said with tears in his eyes. "I know, my boy. You have a bright future ahead of you. Just stay true to yourself and believe in your lucky star," Mr. Turner replied. Now that he had identified the cause of his losses, Mr. Turner could finally focus on his health and continue his battle against the insidious illness that had divided his life into before and after. Over time, Benjamin Turner managed to achieve a stable remission, giving the businessman a chance to accomplish much more in life.